This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
I'd like to welcome a very special guest today, Kitt Shapiro, author of Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. Kitt Shapiro is the daughter of legendary singer, actress, and entertainer Eartha Kitt. Kitt Shapiro had a front row seat to her mother's incredible life and career. Kitt was her mother's manager and continues to this day to manage Eartha Kitt's estate and legacy. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Now, your mother passed about a decade ago. Why do you feel that this was the right time to write this book from your perspective?
Well, it's funny because I had toyed with the idea of for a long time of sort of writing my story and sharing. It's really not so much sharing my life story as much sharing the stories my mother and I, the anecdotes of our life together. After my mother died, it takes a while, I think, to really recover from the death of a parent, especially, I think, for me anyway, mothers and daughters. My relationship with my mother was so intertwined, and I call the book a love story because it really was. I think I needed some separation, some distance from her death. I also found, as we've evolved as a people, humans, the more we stay the same. And I continue even more so probably with social media to get comments about how I can't possibly be my mother's biological child because I don't look like her enough. I'm not dark enough. My skin tone, my hair, my features, whatever people see or they don't want to see. They make those statements, and there are people who continue to make those statements on social media, and it boggles my mind how narrow-minded people can be, that because I don't look, quote unquote, as people think I should look, they want to deny my existence, my who I actually am. I am, in fact, my mother's biological child. And my DNA proves that I am a complete and total mix of many different ethnicities. And I think that's one of the things my mother absolutely loved, that I could be. She would say to me, "You're either a walking United Nations. You either fill every quota or you break every rule." And I think there's something really important about that statement, in that we need to sort of. I mean, we talk about this over and over again. We need to get past this ridiculousness of treating each other differently because of the color of our skin, because we don't look a certain way, something that's completely and totally out of our control. And DNA, genetics is amazing. It boggles the mind of scientists. Often you don't know how things are going to turn out, how people are going to look. So I think that the timing just, it just all just sort of fit, where I was emotionally, where the world was, where the comments were socially, and then, and the book sort of came out of that.
I have to start with a personal anecdote about your mother. I worked in a hotel years ago, and Eartha Kitt was performing at the local, I'm not sure where she was performing, but she was staying at the hotel. And my boss found out, and we worked in the back office. He ran to go see her. And so I snuck and watched her too. And she was so gracious to him. He was practically in tears with how kind she was to him. And he was on cloud nine the rest of the day. I've never, because the hotel we worked in was kind of like the hotel where people would come and celebrities would come. And I don't think anybody caused as much of a stir as she did. And all the time that I worked there.
My mother was really, she didn't have family. I mean, she didn't know her family. I shouldn't say she didn't have family. She didn't know her family. She was an orphan. And she really connected with her fans. She really connected with the people who gave her such incredible love and affection, in the public. And it was really important to her when she met people that she let them know how she felt, that, that in return, that, they're being fans and they're showing her this love. She wanted to make sure that she reciprocated and that they knew how she felt about them.
Because that must be a really tough balance. She's just, at one level, just a regular person going to buy a pack of gum at the gift shop. But then on the other, she does, she's made such an impact on so many people, of people she's never met before or even would conceive of meeting. I mean, that must be a really challenging thing for a human being to go through. And I think a lot of that came through in the book.
Well, I hope it did. It was a challenge for her. I mean, like I said, she was an orphan. She didn't have connection to her family. She didn't know really her identity because she didn't know her birth father. She never found out his identity. She grew up in this on a plantation, a cotton plantation in South Carolina, and who ever expected? She never expected to become this international famous person, but she felt that it was really important to always be able to connect with the other human beings, because that is what we were so unique. It made humans so unique, and our differences and where our beauty lies. And I think there were times, I mean, she was very tiny. My mother was very petite. So sometimes when she was in public and she would be approached by a fan, she was often taken aback and sort of, surprised, because she was a little bit fearful of being in crowds because she was so tiny. But on the other hand, once she would, realize she got her bearings, and she was like, okay, I know it. I'm now, I have to remember where I am and who I am. She often, would embrace back the people. And I think it's something that celebrities, obviously, they struggle with on a daily basis when you're really famous. But I think from my mother, it became something that was important to her, that people knew that she was, always just, a regular person.
It's got to be interesting for you too. And I wonder how it affects you, as even today, so many of the things she has done are iconic. People watch the Batman in reruns, or even my own children know her as Yzma.
Right.
And so she's been not with us for a long time, but it's still, people are connecting with her afresh, people who may not have even been born since her passing.
I think that, to me, is the biggest statement of who she was as a human being, and how she has withstood the test of time. She crossed the fans that she had, as you say, from your children who know her as Yzma, or from the movie Holes, and to people who know her from Boomerang, to going back to Broadway, to Santa Baby, to New Faces of 1952, to when she was discovered by Orson Welles. I mean, she absolutely transcends time, and I think that's because she was always true to herself. She was a beautiful, exotic female, who was a standalone in her unique sound, her look. And she was outspoken, and she was willing to put herself out there and speak up for, the indignities and atrocities that she saw and that she felt, and stand up for people who, were also unique and different, and defend them. And I think that really shows her strength, her inner strength. And it doesn't show her fearlessness, because I don't think she was fearless. I think many times she was terrified to speak up, but she felt that she had a duty as a human being to stand up for those maybe who didn't have a voice, or even, and I'm not sure, even if she hadn't become a famous person, she would have been, I don't think she would have been different. I think she would have just felt, you stand up for each other, you defend each other, you stand by each other. And that, to me, shows that the young people of today are yearning to have these role models, especially female role models. I think are really, really important. And when I look on our social media, our largest demographic are women 18 to 35. So that speaks to exactly what you were, just talking about.
It's really interesting. Eartha Kitt, she was in such a dynamic time, the golden age of Hollywood, the 60s, and then into the 70s, where so much had changed. And she's a person who's a woman in this really difficult industry for women, oftentimes. And she's in the music industry, which can be very difficult, and African American. What were some of the highlights of her career in those different periods, or just overall some of the real things that people can grab onto?
Well, I think you mentioned the Batman series, right? And so when she was cast at the role of Catwoman in the Batman TV series, so that was 1967, 68. You have to remember that was a time when you didn't really see interracial relationships. It's, certainly on screen. And so here you had in this sort of over-the-top campy television series, the white male lead, have this relationship with, even though she was the villain, she was dressed in this skin tight, very sexy outfit. There was this sort of unspoken sexual tension between them. She was a very strong, even though the good guy always won in the end of the episode, she never lost who she was, right? As the villain, as a strong woman. So I think that really said a lot. It spoke really loudly to an unspoken way. And when I look back on that and I think, wow, that was a really big deal. It was a big undertaking for the producers, for the network, for my mother to really step into that role, because that could not have been an easy decision to make. So I think that character, that Catwoman character, was probably in many ways the unspoken biggest piece of her career. Of course, she was outspoken politically. She was outspoken, as far as women's rights and the rights of, the LGBTQ community, as far as, ethnic, racial rights. I mean, so I think that she had so many different levels beyond her talent that it's really a testimony to why she has, retained such incredible level of popularity even to this day.
I mean, I could ask so many questions about Eartha Kitt's career, but I think the power of this book is seeing it through your perspective as a young person during this. And I thought that was so fascinating. And I think one of the questions that I had is, you grew up in Hollywood, but you didn't really grow up in Hollywood, that there really was a separation that your mom seemed to put in between you and like the real, growing up in kind of the things that we think of as bad Hollywood. What was it like growing up in Hollywood?
Well, again, I think you just said I didn't really experience the true Hollywood because my mother wasn't a Hollywood insider. I mean, that was her profession. That was her career, but it wasn't who she was as a person. We didn't associate with other, necessarily famous people. And although looking back, there were famous people who came in and out of our lives. And but she was much more down to earth. Her given name was in fact Eartha, and that is really who she was. And she wanted to make sure that even though I grew up in this luxury world, that I understood that wasn't how the real world was. Beverly Hills, California, quote unquote, was not the real world. And so when my mother would travel to anywhere professionally, she often took me with her. I would go with a tutor, and because she felt it was really, really important for me to see how other worlds function, how societies, how other beliefs, how other ethnicities, how other religious, belief people who live in communities, what the real world was like. And so she made it a real effort, aside from the fact that she loved to learn about human beings and their differences, and because she felt that's how we would be able to live in better harmony with each other, when we can understand each other and respect our differences. So when we would travel the world, my mother would make sure that we saw not just the hotels and the sightseeing and the places that they would show to foreigners, but she would try to befriend taxi drivers or hotel staff and to go to their homes, because she really wanted to understand their customs. And so that's how she would expose me to that. So I understood from a very young age, infancy, how what real people were really like, And I think that was one of the incredible gifts that she gave me, and that she possessed herself, this desire to really understand and to learn. My mother was an avid reader, and she read the philosophers. She read all the different books of religious books, so that she could really understand what other people were, what they thought, what they felt. And I think that's an incredible gift. She didn't think, she said, you can't learn this in the book. You can't learn this in school. This is stuff you need to see firsthand. You need to visit neighborhoods, whether it be within your country, within your city, within your town, or, around the world. We were blessed to be able to travel internationally. And so we really saw that. So I do think that was, what my world was really like. My world was not really learning, living the Hollywood life, quote unquote.
Do you think, because I found that was really fascinating, and I was always wondering, was it something that your mom specifically did, or was it easier back then to sort of live a more low-key lifestyle, even though she was a major world celebrity?
Yeah, I think in many ways it was easier. I think obviously the press and the paparazzi have become, much different levels of, as time has transcended. And now with social media, there's no privacy. So yes, it was a different world. It also was, I lived in Beverly Hills. I lived in Los Angeles. It was sort of, what kind of everybody did, I'm not distracting it, but everybody had probably that we knew had some involvement in the entertainment business. So it wasn't as, sort of like, who cares? Okay, it's Eartha Kitt. It's like, yet another famous person, yet another entertainment person. So I do think that was a little bit more of it. I remember telling my kids the first time I took them when they were old enough to realize, Beverly Hills, what they saw on television, was not the town I grew up in. I grew up in the Beverly Hills. It was a little bit more of a quieter town. Didn't have the big flashy stores that it does today. It wasn't over the top as much as it is today. But that's just, the evolution of society and where we are. So I do think it was easier for her to live like that. But, even as she got older and she no longer lived in California, she lived on the East Coast, she still lived a very sort of quieter, subdued life. She had her own vegetable garden. She recycled. She was very much, I often say my mother was the original Beverly Hillbilly. I mean, she really believed in and understood the importance of living a cleaner, healthier lifestyle where you don't, pollute your environment, where you're what we call now the carbon footprint. My mother truly was about, knowing exactly the importance of taking care of our environment and the world around you. So she always wanted to live that sort of life. It was just the nature of who she was as a human being.
And that's interesting because it kind of leads into the way you described your upbringing, that she really raised you with the kind of the old school foundational values of politeness and respecting others and kindness and having etiquette and speaking in a certain way. And where were those values instilled in her, and how did she instill them into you?
I think that they were instilled in her because it was the times, right? I mean, we were much more polite, and whether the kindness was genuine or just, a facade, my mother felt that kindness was the way to be towards each other. There was no reason to be to feel hatred or anger towards somebody else, especially if you didn't even know them. So I think that it was just the times. I also think she understood some I don't know, cellular level that, when you are kind and you put out kindness, that's what you receive back from the universe. She's just a big believer of the positive energy that you put into the universe is what you will get back. As human beings will do that. That will happen if you exercise it. She also didn't feel that manners were trite. We kind of think of the, whether you hold your fork right or you dress a certain way when you because of you're going to, whatever event you're going to, or building, if you're going to the theater, you're going into a religious, institute. There's just a certain way you should be presenting yourself, how we should present ourselves to each other. She felt that those were not things that were superfluous. Those were really important, because when you took care of yourself, when you presented yourself in a certain way, it made you feel differently, and it made the person who you were greeting feel differently. And it was a respect to that person and to the place you were in, as well as respecting yourself. So these were foundations that I'm not quite sure where how they were instilled so strongly in her, but that it was really important for her to instill these beliefs in me, and the importance of being kind to each other, treating each other with kindness, having good manners, respecting your elders, respecting a situation or an environment. I sound like an older person myself. These are lost arts. These are the way we see people dressing. I mean, I know that seems very frivolous, but my mother taught me it's not frivolous. It just shows respect. When you respect yourself and you have respect for others, then there's just a level of way that you live and you interact with each other that is just it's just a better place. She felt, and I totally agree with her.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, I think that it really, when you carry yourself a certain way, it shows that you respect yourself and you respect others, for sure.
It's funny. I mean, I write in the book about, how she mentored a lot of kids in Watts in Los Angeles. And one of the things that she felt was really important was to teach them that, and all young people, when you walk into a room and you greet someone who's older than you are, to look them in the eye, to carry yourself with your head up high and your shoulders back and with pride, and that person will in turn then treat you differently because of that. And so it's it's definitely this snowball effect that will happen when we present ourselves, with respect, and then other people will hopefully, there are some people who won't. Well, obviously there's those ones who you can never, teach to treat each other nicely, but that if we can carry ourselves with respect, that other people will in turn treat us respectfully. And that it's really important to respect your elders. That my mother was a real stickler for that. She felt that the people who were older than we are, my mother, even when she was, in her 60s and 70s, if she met somebody who was of equal age or older, she referred to them as Mr. and Mrs. until they said, you could call me by my first name. And I think that those are sort of little idiosyncrasies, but to her it was really important because our elders have, experienced more life, that they just deserve the respect because they've been here longer and they've seen more and they have knowledge because of that.
You and your mother, you formed a really tight unit all throughout the book, that it was mostly the two of you together. Was there ever times where, maybe Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin would just pop over, or was it mostly just a normal kind of suburban growing up?
It was mostly, I hate to disappoint, but it was mostly just the suburban, boring, normal growing up. She was, when I was born, my mother was already very famous. So I didn't know her as anything else. And she was just who she was. I didn't know a difference. That's who, that's what my mother did for a living. Yeah, she was a famous person. She was a performer. She was an artist. She was creative. So there weren't a lot of so much famous people who showed up. There were a lot of other creative people, because I do think creative people tend to, mingle with each other, because there's a different level of living, of understanding, of processing things that other creatives kind of get. But yeah, it was just sort of my mother took me to school, every day when she wasn't, when we were back in Los Angeles. She took me to school. She took me to, whatever after school activity or before school activity. I was ice skating for a while, so that was often early in the morning before school. And she would get up and, 5 a.m. to, make me my breakfast, and off we would go. And that's how we really did live our lives.
Your mother, she was very polite and she instilled those values, but I get the sense that she didn't maybe suffer fools, or she wasn't afraid to call something straight up if she saw it. And that Lady Bird Johnson incident really struck with me. How did that affect her career? And I'm also wondering, you were young at the time, but did you have any sort of feelings, or was there anything that you remember from that time that struck you?
So, I mean, yeah, my mother did not suffer fools lightly. I mean, she was one, if you asked her opinion, she thought you actually wanted to hear it. So she was one that would tell you how she felt. And she was, she felt very passionate about certain, certain things in life. And the incident you're referring to was about the Vietnam War, when she was invited to the White House for a luncheon with Lady Bird Johnson, along with many other women at this particular luncheon. Her opinion was asked about the war and what she felt about it, and she didn't agree with Johnson's involving the United States in this particular altercation, and so she said it. She spoke it up, and she spoke, her truth, which she was always very willing to do. Many times as I got older, I would often say, why do you have to, why don't you just stay quiet sometimes? And she's, because it's not who I am. I have to be true to myself. And her career was very drastically affected by her speaking out against the Johnson administration's involvement involving the United States in Vietnam. Unfortunately, Lady Bird was there with her press secretary, and needless to say, it was my mother's response that she didn't think that we should be involved in Vietnam, and that she felt that many other young people felt the same, and they were, the draft dodgers were protesting because of their feeling so adamantly that we had no right to be there. President Johnson thought that, my mother needed to be investigated, quote unquote. And he had the FBI, he sent them out to find out any information to see if my mother was a communist, or see if, what anti-American associations she had. They found nothing. And then it is documented. There is a dossier, a CIA dossier, that my mother discovered when Watergate broke, and Seymour Hersh from the New York Times called my mother and told her that they had found a dossier on her in the White House, not in the White House, in the CIA. And he sent the CIA, and his comment to them was, find anything you can on that woman. I don't care what it is. At the time, her career was sort of squashed in the United States. She already had a huge international following. So, she kind of were dates disappeared in the US, they were filled back in, from other dates around the world. I didn't really understand or know what was going on. I mean, again, she kept me pretty out of the business part of the entertainment world that she lived in, and wanted me to be a kid and really, not be worried and scared about what might be happening. I think I understood that there were rumblings. I could feel emotionally that there was stuff going on. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and we traveled, Europe a lot more frequently. We toured, we spent more time around the world. It wasn't obvious to me that it was, a big difference, but now that I look back on it, I mean, it clearly was. And it was an unfortunate, I think she was really hurt by that, because my mother took very literally, our constitutional rights, and freedom of speech was, it is a right. And she felt that, even though that she'd been asked, it was her opinion that she was given, and she was, not violent about it or any way demonstrative. She just said what she felt, and she was punished for that. And that to her was really, really, hurtful for, I think, most of her life, the rest of her life. She didn't really totally accept that, that had happened, unfortunately. But it, listen, we see it time and time again, to even, in these days and times. So yeah, it affected her career, in a negative way. But she was a survivor, and just felt, well, where one door closes, another opens, and you have to keep moving forward. That's what life is. You can't just give up. You can't just stop and cry. And even though you want to, you just keep persevering.
And it just seemed like such an odd thing because all she really did was say some pretty objective facts. It wasn't like she was being hostile or anything like that. Do you think, and did she at all think that it was maybe that the powers that be didn't think that a woman should be speaking that way, or a African American woman should be speaking up in front of the powers that be? Was there more to it than just her being like a quote unquote un-American?
Yeah, I think she did feel that. I think that she felt she never really said it out loud. Well, she probably did if you listen to some of her interviews. Yeah, I think she felt that because she was a woman of color, that yes, that she received much more wrath than, much harsher treatment than if she had certainly been a white male. There's no doubt in her mind and in my mind that it was because she was a female and a woman of color that she received such incredible backlash.
Because it really is interesting. There was other celebrities at that time who, like Jane Fonda, and her career was able to revitalize really quickly after that. How long did it take Eartha to get her career and to get back into the U.S. entertainment market?
It really wasn't until after Watergate broke. So we're looking at 1974, around
so
then.
A decade.
Yeah, it was a decade, if not longer. Probably it was actually when she came back to Broadway in I want to say it was 77. And my years may not be correct, but then she came back to Broadway in Timbuktu, and then we brought the show Timbuktu went on the road in the national tour, and we were in Washington D.C. and there was a very big thing that President Carter had invited my mother back to the White House for the first time since then. So that was more than a decade later. And that was even though she went back and the Carters sort of embraced her back into the quote unquote world, United States working world. It never really, her emotionally, she never really recovered from that.
Did she prefer stage or film or TV? Was there something that she more was drawn towards or really enjoyed more than the other aspects of the entertainment industry?
She loved live performance, whether it be her own performance, concert performances, or it be, theater or musical theater, because she felt the unknown was much more sort of exciting. There's an energy level when you're in front of a live audience. You can't edit. You can't, make it look nice. You can't fix it in that moment. You have to just go with the flow and figure it out and fly by the seat of your pants sometimes. And so I think that was always her favorite milieu.
And now a brief word from our sponsors. How did your relationship evolve as you went from a child to a teenager and then as to a young adult? Because it can often, there's always kind of growing pains in a relationship, and especially when you're so close with someone. Did your relationships ever get strained, or was it fairly smooth sailing?
No, I mean, I think, as much as I talk about this, and the book is subtitled, A Love Story in black and white. And it was, but it wasn't, always, it wasn't Nirvana. I mean, we were mother and daughter. I mean, there were many times, where I would roll my eyes and, and where she, would just not be present and not say anything. And, and there was, there were definite moments of my not wanting to be, mothered to such an extent, because, my mother, we were very close, and my mother absolutely adored me. And sometimes I, as a young adult and a teenager, I felt that was too much, stop smothering me. I don't want to be hanging out with you all the time. I want to be with my friends. So yeah, I mean, we had, it was a pretty typical on many levels mother-daughter relationship. That being said, I do think I had this certain understanding that I was really important to her on a really foundational level. She didn't have any family that she knew of. she yearned for this, this love and this connection with another person. And I sort of gave her that. I often say my mother would introduce us and she would say, I'm Eartha and this is Kitt, as if I completed her somehow. And I think I did in many ways complete her. I think I gave her these roots that she so wanted and yearned for. So I do think I knew that. I understood that very, very early on, that I was my presence in her life was really, really crucial. So I do think there were times when I kind of, was willing to stay quiet, I don't want to use the term second banana because it's certainly not, because I was always the first in her world. But I was okay with that. I was okay being her daughter. I still am, and I was very blessed by that. I think that because she showed me such incredible love, and there was this, that's what we want. We all want to be loved, and to be loved that completely by another person, even though as a teenager and young adult, it feels very overwhelming, on a real, deep level. I understood how incredibly blessed I was.
Your life circumstances brought you to the East Coast and away from your mom. What did that do to your relationship? And eventually you said that your mom did move to the East Coast. Was it difficult for her to separate herself?
It was actually a little opposite. She was brought to the East Coast first, because when she did Timbuktu on Broadway, that's what brought her back east. And I sort of came reluctantly, because I had no interest in leaving California. I came reluctantly to live in New York. And then she sort of wanted to go back to California and live, because we had our house out there the whole time, and live there. And that's when it was probably like I was 18 or 19 that I said, I don't want to go back to California. I'm live on the East Coast now. This is where I want to stay. And that was hard for her. She always saw me, going back to my childhood home and living in there and us sort of being, I think, out there together. So, she did decide to move, to totally relocate. She relocated to Connecticut, as the years went on. It took her a long time, though, to actually part with my childhood home that she had bought in 1957. So it was a hard thing for her to finally let go of. She didn't let go of that until the mid 90s. But yeah, then it was not easy for her for me, to her to understand that, I wanted to live my own life, and not back in California. But it worked out. She moved to Connecticut, and then that's where we both ended up, finally living, and that's where she passed, where she lived in her home in Connecticut.
That's always it can be interesting, but also challenging for a grandparent to move near the grandchildren, because you want to be close enough, but not too close, so that she could have her own life. How did she grow into that role? And especially living in Connecticut, that it's not Hollywood, it's not California. How did she grow into that role?
Well, it's funny. So we lived in Westport, Connecticut, which in many ways is a Hollywood. There are a lot of celebrities who live out here. So, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward and, Christopher Plummer. And there's just, Lucy Arnaz. There's just a lot of people, and there are more and more coming to this day. But so it was sort of this very creative environment. My mother performed at the Westport Playhouse, which has been around for decades. She first performed there, I want to say, in 1959 or 1957 or something like that. So that that was a connection that she made with this particular community that we were in on the East Coast. We lived 3 miles away from each other. I worked for my mother at Eartha Kitt Productions, so our involvement was always very interconnected. My mother wasn't the grandmotherly type, though, I will say, which I think some people are a little surprised by. she was definitely more of a mother than she was of a grandmother, which is interesting.
Yeah.
She wasn't quite sure. It's hard, right? I mean, I was her whole world. And so then I had these children and they were my world. And so, that took me a little bit, emotionally away from her. So it was a little bit in her mind. She didn't show it, but I could always sense that she had a little bit of conflict of, that she loved me more. I mean, she didn't, she wouldn't have said, my grandchildren are everything to me. She would have said, my child is everything to me. But, because we worked together and we lived so close together, our lives were always so intertwined. It was, I think it was it worked well for us.
How do you think that she would have done today in this social media world where it's so important to have a TikTok presence and this Instagram and all of those different things? How did, and by the time she passed, that was still kind of in its infancy.
Yeah.
How do you think that she would have adjusted to that sort of level of celebrity?
I think there's a part of me that says she would have not been a part of it at all, that it wouldn't have been something she understood. But I think then there's another part of me that says, she would have probably embraced it a little too much, not so much as a TikTok star, but as much as, you can speak up and you can, have your voice heard. And I think she would appreciate that, more and more people can do that because of social media. That being said, I think she probably would have, said things and, and too many times or she would have been very outspoken. It would not have stopped her from her outspokenness. And that would have been hard because I think she would have the reverberations that you get back, nowadays when you say something on, social media, certainly as a celebrity, I think it would have been a double-edged sword for her.
And she had some of a social media presence, a pretty large social media presence. And do you continue that to this day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to. I do. We have a good amount, fair a couple of 100,000 followers on Facebook. Her Facebook page is The Eartha Kitt. And, I feel that I share our relationship and who she was as a person a lot because she was so unique and she was such a trailblazer and a role model. And as I say over and over again, I was so blessed, and blessings are meant to be shared, that I think it's really important to keep her legacy alive. And we all have a legacy. And my mother happens to have a big one, and she happens to be a very famous person. But we all have people in our lives, who were wise and who impacted their community, their family, their little world. My mother would tell me the importance of a pebble and how when you would throw a big rock in the pond, you could see the big ripples that, the change that it would affect, those ripples affect on the shore. But the pebbles, even though they're tiny, they too affect change. It just takes longer and it takes more of them. But to me, that would say that we each, every one of us, no matter, even however small a voice we might feel that we have, we can affect a change in ourselves and in one other person, which is why it's so important, to have a sense of humor, to smile, often say every day, make sure you smile, make sure you laugh. It might change someone's life, and that person could just be you. And I think that's a really important way to live. And that is how my mother truly lived her life.
That's so cool. Is there a particular performance or something that you think that just really encapsulates her, that you think of fondly in your mind, that's the performance that I remember my mom, Eartha Kitt, as?
So my mother would close all of her concerts with the Artie Butler song, Here's to Life. And there's something about the way that she interpreted and sang that song that to me was often really powerful, and it spoke to her who she truly, truly was. And the song starts where it says, no complaints and no regrets. And I think that's exactly how she lived. She didn't really complain, and she had no regret. There's nothing I would change. That's an incredible way to live your life and to embrace every single day. She really felt that every day that you could open your eyes and you could see, you can hear, you can speak, you can taste, you can walk. Those were blessings right there. That in itself was the reason why you gave thanks to whatever you believe in. Doesn't matter what God it is. You gave thanks every day. And I think that, we now have this gratitude is so important that we talk about feeling gratitude and gratitude lists. And we're all sort of, feeling that we should make these every day. My mother lived that way every single day. And that is an incredible legacy and an incredible role model to have grown up with.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen. Of course, a big thanks goes out to Kitt Shapiro, author of Eartha and Kitt, A Daughter's Love Story in Black and White. Links to learn more about Kitt Shapiro's book can be found at simonandschuster.com or in the show notes. A great way to support Beyond the Big Screen is to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. These reviews really help me know what you think about the show and help others learn about Beyond the Big Screen. You can connect with me and other people who want to learn more about movies they watch and stories so great they should be movies on Facebook and Twitter by searching for A2Z History. You can contact me there or just send me an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com. Links to this and more can be found at my website, a2zhistorypage.com. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time beyond the big screen.